Have you ever walked away from an argument feeling more exhausted than enlightened? Do you find yourself constantly explaining your point to people who aren't even trying to understand? What if the real power lies not in winning arguments, but in walking away from them? If these questions strike a chord with you, then this video is for you. Welcome to a journey in self-mastery, inspired by the wisdom of Stoic philosophy. Before we dive in, remember to like, share, and subscribe for more content that helps you grow stronger, calmer, and wiser every day. There's a truth that many of us learn the hard way. Not every argument is worth your energy. Stoic philosophy teaches us that peace is priceless, and some battles simply cost too much. Let's talk about the kind of people Stoics would never waste time debating with, and more importantly, why you shouldn't either. 1. They don't want to listen, only to win. There exists a particular breed of conversational participant, one whose presence signals not an impending exchange of ideas, but an impending battle. You can sense it almost immediately. Their posture might lean forward aggressively. Their eyes hold a challenging glint rather than an open curiosity, and their interruptions are frequent, sharp, and strategically placed not for clarification, but for derailment. These individuals enter conversations not as explorers seeking mutual understanding or new perspectives, but as gladiators stepping into an arena, armed with rhetoric and driven by a singular goal, victory. For them, dialogue is not a collaborative dance of discovery. It is a zero-sum game where one person must emerge triumphant and the other must be vanquished. Listening, in its truest sense, the act of absorbing, considering, and attempting to genuinely comprehend another's viewpoint, is entirely absent from their toolkit. Instead, what masquerades as listening is merely a pause, a tactical moment of silence where they are not processing your words but reloading their own rhetorical cannons, waiting for the slightest gap in your speech to launch their next volley. Their objective is dominance. They mistake the conversational space for a battlefield, and every point made for territory to be conquered. You'll notice characteristic behaviors. Their volume increases disproportionately to the topic's intensity, attempting to overwhelm rather than persuade. They employ rapid-fire interruptions, cutting you off mid-sentence to prevent your idea from fully forming or landing. They might engage in whataboutism, deflecting valid points by abruptly shifting focus to unrelated issues, or employ straw-man arguments, misrepresenting your position into an easily defeated caricature. The entire interaction steers relentlessly towards asserting their superiority, proving themselves right at all costs, even if it means sacrificing truth, nuance, or the relationship itself. There is no genuine interest in the substance of your argument, only in the act of dismantling it, regardless of the means. Learning is not on the agenda. Intellectual submission is. When confronted with such an adversary, the instinctual reaction for many is to fight fire with fire, to argue louder, faster, more forcefully, to meet interruptions with interruptions, to counter dominance with attempted dominance. This is a natural, albeit counterproductive, impulse. It stems from a desire to defend one's position, to not be intellectually bullied, to stand one's ground. However, engaging on their terms is precisely what the argumentative warrior desires. It validates their combative approach and drags you down into the unproductive mire of their making. You expend precious energy, raise your own stress levels, and become increasingly frustrated, all while achieving absolutely nothing in terms of genuine communication or resolution. You're playing their game, by their rules, on their turf. And in this game, the house always wins, because the house defines winning not as reaching truth, but as exhausting or overpowering the opponent. Here, the wisdom of Stoicism offers a powerful and liberating alternative. The Stoics, masters of inner peace and rational living, understood the crucial distinction between what is within our control and what is not, the dichotomy of control. You cannot control another person's intention, their willingness to listen, their ego, or their deep-seated need to win. Attempting to force them to change their approach is as futile as commanding the tide to stop. What is within your control, however, is your own response, your judgment of the situation, and your decision on how to allocate your time and energy. Recognizing the signs of a win-at-all-cost arguer is the first step. See the raised voice, the constant interruptions, the lack of genuine engagement not as a personal affront demanding a fierce counterattack, but as data points indicating an unproductive dynamic. The Stoic response is not weakness. It is strategic disengagement born of wisdom. Step back, metaphorically and sometimes even literally. Preserve your inner tranquility, your apatheia, the state of being undisturbed by external events or others' passions. Understand that winning this particular battle yields no real prize worth having. The true victory lies not in landing the final verbal blow, but in safeguarding your peace of mind and refusing to be drawn into pointless conflict. This doesn't mean you must flee at the first sign of disagreement. Healthy debate is valuable. But when dialogue devolves into dominance, recognize a shift. You can consciously choose to stop feeding the conflict. This might involve calmly stating, "I see we have different perspectives on this, and it seems we're not going to reach an agreement right now." Or simply refusing to take the bait when they escalate. It might mean changing the subject or, if necessary, physically removing yourself from the conversation. This isn't about being rude. It's about self-preservation and respecting your own mental resources. As Marcus Aurelius might suggest, focus on your own actions and judgments, which are within your sphere of influence, rather than being agitated by the actions of others, which are not. The true power, the Stoics teach, is not demonstrated in the force of your argument against an unwilling opponent, but in the strength of your resolve to protect your inner citadel, your peace, by choosing when and where to engage. Walking away from a fight you cannot win, and which offers no value even if won, is not defeat. It is the highest form of strategic wisdom. 2. They twist your words. Have you ever found yourself in a conversation where you articulate a point with care, only to hear it echoed back in a distorted, almost unrecognizable form? It's a deeply frustrating and destabilizing experience. You said X, intending a specific meaning within a particular context, but the other person retells it as Y, subtly or sometimes blatantly altering its essence to fit their own narrative or to paint you in an unfavorable light. This isn't a simple misunderstanding, a mere slip of the tongue in repetition. It's a deliberate tactic, a form of conversational manipulation designed to undermine, discredit, or control. Some individuals possess a disconcerting expertise in this art of semantic distortion. They are masters of taking words out of context, reframing neutral statements as hostile, exaggerating nuances, or assigning malicious intent where none existed. Their goal is not to clarify or understand your perspective. It is to weaponize your own language against you. This twisting of words can manifest in various ways. Perhaps they seize upon a single phrase, isolating it from the surrounding explanation that provided crucial context, making it seem extreme or unreasonable. They might subtly rephrase your statement, changing a key adjective or verb to shift the meaning entirely, then attribute this altered version back to you. Sometimes they engage in projection, accusing you of holding beliefs or motives that are actually their own, using a distorted interpretation of your words as proof. A common tactic is to create a false dilemma or slippery slope argument based on a misrepresentation of your initial point, forcing you to defend against an extreme scenario you never proposed. They might say, "So, what you're really saying is," followed by a conclusion that bears little resemblance to your original statement, but serves their purpose of making you appear foolish, uncaring, or radical. The natural impulse when your words are twisted is to correct the record vigorously. You want to clarify, re-explain, point out the misrepresentation, and meticulously dissect how your original statement differs from their distorted version. You might feel compelled to provide evidence, elaborate further, and pour energy into dismantling their inaccurate portrayal. After all, your meaning was clear to you, and it feels unjust to be so fundamentally misunderstood or misrepresented. However, engaging in this often proves to be an exhausting and ultimately futile endeavor when dealing with someone committed to this manipulative tactic. Their objective isn't accuracy, it's control and advantage. Each attempt you make to correct them merely provides more raw material for them to twist. You offer clarification A, and they spin it into distortion B. You refute B, and they pivot to misrepresentation C. It becomes a maddening game of conversational whack-a-mole, where you expend significant energy trying to pin down elusive misinterpretations while they effortlessly generate new ones. You won't win this game by playing it, because the game itself is rigged against genuine communication. Stoicism provides a powerful framework for navigating this specific challenge. At its core, Stoicism emphasizes focusing on what is truly ours, our judgments, intentions, and actions. While we should strive to communicate clearly and honestly, reflecting the virtue of wisdom and justice, the interpretation and potential manipulation of our words by others lie firmly outside our direct control. Epictetus powerfully reminds us that it's not events or words themselves that disturb us, but our judgments about them. When someone twists your words, the disturbance arises from your judgment that this misrepresentation is an intolerable injustice that must be corrected for your integrity to remain intact in their eyes. The Stoic path suggests a different approach. Don't wrestle with snakes. Recognize the manipulation for what it is, a reflection of the other person's character or tactics, not a true reflection of your words or worth. Instead of getting drawn into an endless, draining cycle of correction and recorrection, adopt a strategy of clear, concise, and limited response. State your truth, your intended meaning, clearly and calmly once. That's not what I said. What I meant was concise clarification. Or, I believe my original statement was clear and I stand by it. After this single, clear statement, let it be. Refuse to be drawn further into the weeds of their distortions. This requires cultivating a degree of detachment from how others choose to perceive or represent you. Your integrity, your character, your true meaning. These are internal qualities. They do not depend on external validation or the accurate interpretation of someone determined to misunderstand. Trying to force someone to acknowledge your true meaning when they are invested in distorting, it is like trying to sculpt water. It's an exercise in futility. The Stoic understands that true self-worth comes from living virtuously, speaking truthfully to the best of your ability, and acting with integrity, regardless of whether others recognize or affirm it. Their inability or unwillingness to accurately represent your words is their failing, not yours. Preserve your energy and your peace by refusing to participate in their manipulative language games. Your clarity and consistency, over time, will speak for themselves to those who are willing to listen genuinely. Your integrity doesn't require the approval or the accurate reporting of those committed to twisting your words. It simply requires you to live it. 3. They argue with emotions, not facts. Imagine a discussion where you are carefully laying out a logical argument, supported by evidence, data, or reasoned principles. You present your points sequentially, building a case based on factual premises and rational deductions. Then, abruptly, the response you receive is not a counterargument addressing your logic or challenging your facts, but an explosion of emotion. Anger flares, accusations fly, tears may well up, or a wall of defensive indignation rises. Where you offered reason, they retort with raw feeling. Where you brought evidence, they counter with anecdotes steeped in personal offense or generalized outrage. This dramatic shift from a potentially rational exchange to an emotional tempest is a common, yet deeply challenging conversational dynamic. When reason fails them, or when their position lacks logical support, some individuals instinctively, or perhaps strategically, pivot to emotional chaos. The argument ceases to be about the issue at hand and becomes centered on their feelings about the issue, or worse, their feelings about you for even raising it. This emotional escalation can take many forms. It might be overt anger, shouting hostile language, personal attacks veiled as passionate disagreement. It could manifest as sudden defensiveness, where any point you make is interpreted as a personal criticism, leading to responses like, "Are you saying I'm stupid?" or "Why are you always attacking me?" Sometimes it takes the form of performative victimhood, using tears or expressions of deep hurt to derail the logical progression of the conversation and elicit sympathy or guilt. They might employ appeals to pity, "Think about how this makes me feel," or lean heavily on subjective experiences. "Well, my experience proves you're wrong," as if personal anecdotes automatically invalidate objective data or logical principles. The common thread is the abandonment of reasoned discourse in favor of leveraging emotional intensity to control the interaction, shut down opposing views, or avoid accountability for their own lack of a factual counter-argument. The immediate temptation when faced with such an emotional onslaught is often to either meet fire with fire, responding with your own frustration or anger, or to become entangled in trying to manage their emotions. You might find yourself trying to soothe their anger, appease their hurt, or defensively justify yourself against their emotional accusations. Both responses, however, play directly into the dynamic they've created. Engaging emotionally escalates the conflict, turning it into a shouting match or a melodrama where reason is utterly lost. Trying to placate their emotions often shifts the focus entirely away from the original topic and validates their tactic of using feelings as a conversational trump card. You become trapped in a cycle of emotional reaction and management, diverting energy from the substantive issue and potentially compromising your own position in an attempt to restore calm. Stoicism offers a profound antidote to being swept away by another's emotional tide. A cornerstone of Stoic thought is the supremacy of reason, logos, and the cultivation of inner equanimity, apatheia. The Stoics understood that emotions, particularly strong, reactive ones, often stem from flawed judgments about events. As Epictetus taught, people are disturbed not by things, but by the view which they take of them. When someone responds to your logical points with anger or distress, a Stoic perspective recognizes that their emotion arises from their interpretation, their judgments, their sensitivities, things largely outside your control and not necessarily a reflection of objective reality or the validity of your argument. Their emotional outburst is their internal weather pattern, not yours to be caught in. The Stoic response, therefore, begins internally. Maintain your own calm. Breathe. Recognize the emotional escalation for what it is, a departure from reasoned dialogue, potentially a sign of their inability to engage logically, but not necessarily a valid refutation of your points. Remind yourself that you are not responsible for managing their emotional state. Your responsibility lies in maintaining control of your own mind and responses. Instead of meeting fire with fire, meet it with stillness. This doesn't mean being cold or dismissive, but rather maintaining a rational composure amidst their emotional storm. Practically, this might involve pausing before responding, giving yourself a moment to center. You might calmly state, "I understand this topic evokes strong feelings, but I'd like to return to the facts we were discussing." Or, "I can see you're upset. Perhaps we could discuss this when things are calmer." The key is to refuse to mirror their emotional intensity. Do not raise your voice because they are shouting. Do not become defensive because they are accusatory. If possible, gently redirect back to the substance of the argument, focusing on objective points. However, if the emotional tide is too strong, recognize that productive conversation is likely impossible at that moment. The wisest course might be tactical retreat. It seems we're unable to discuss this productively right now. Let's pause this conversation. You are not in the conversation to win a shouting match or to emerge victorious from an emotional brawl. You are there ideally to exchange ideas, seek truth, or solve problems rationally. When emotion completely hijacks the process, continuing to engage logically is like trying to reason with a hurricane. The Stoic priority becomes preserving your own inner peace and rational control. By refusing to be pulled into their emotional chaos, you maintain mastery over your own mind, conserve your energy for more productive endeavors, and, perhaps subtly, model the power of reason even in the face of unreason. Controlling your response to their emotion is where your true strength lies. For they never admit when they're wrong. We have all encountered them. Individuals locked in a fortress of infallibility, seemingly incapable of uttering the simple phrase, "I was mistaken," or "You have a point, I need to reconsider." For some, admitting error feels less like a natural part of learning and growth, and more like a fundamental defeat, a crack in the very foundation of their self-worth. Pride, ego, or perhaps a deep-seated insecurity constructs an impenetrable wall around their positions. They will defend a demonstrably false statement, cling to a debunked belief, or justify a poor decision with astonishing tenacity, often employing intricate rationalizations, blame shifting, or outright denial rather than concede even the smallest fallibility. Every conversation with them on a point of disagreement becomes a siege against this fortress, a battle against an opponent who would rather defend a lie to the bitter end than acknowledge a mistake. This inability to admit wrongness manifests in various defensive maneuvers. When presented with contradictory evidence, they might dismiss the source. That study is flawed. You can't trust that website. They might engage in semantic acrobatics, arguing over definitions rather than substance. That's not technically what I meant. Blame shifting is common. I only did that because you did X first. It's not my fault the circumstances changed. They might double down, repeating their incorrect assertion with even greater force, hoping volume or repetition will substitute for validity. Sometimes, they resort to gaslighting, try to convince you that your perception of their error is mistaken. The underlying mechanism is often cognitive dissonance, the mental discomfort experienced when holding contradictory beliefs or when evidence challenges a core belief. To resolve this discomfort, instead of modifying their belief, admitting they were wrong, they reject or distort the challenging information, preserving their sense of consistency and rightness, however illusory. The temptation, when faced with such resolute denial of the obvious, is to push harder, to marshal more evidence, to construct more elaborate arguments, to meticulously dismantle their flawed reasoning point by point. We believe, perhaps optimistically, that if we just present the facts clearly enough, logically enough, persistently enough, the wall will eventually crumble and truth will prevail. We invest time, mental energy, and emotional capital into the effort of convincing them. We feel that truth demands acknowledgement, that errors must be corrected for the sake of clarity, progress, or even just objective reality. However, this investment is almost always a poor one. Every moment spent trying to force an admission of error from someone psychologically incapable or unwilling to offer is, quite simply, a moment wasted. You are pouring your valuable resources into an endeavor with virtually no chance of success, chipping away at granite with a teaspoon. Stoicism offers profound guidance here, rooted in its emphasis on virtue, truth, and the acceptance of what we cannot change. The Stoics valued truth and reason, but they also understood the limits of their influence over others' minds and egos. Marcus Aurelius frequently reminded himself to act according to nature and reason, and to speak the truth as he understood it, but without attachment to whether others accepted it. The virtue lies in the truthful expression and the rational process, not in compelling agreement or forcing concessions. Furthermore, the dichotomy of control is paramount. Another person's ego, their pride, their psychological defenses, these are fundamentally outside your sphere of control. You can present truth, but you cannot force its acceptance. The Stoic approach advises clarity and detachment. Speak your truth. Present your facts or reasons clearly, calmly, and concisely. Do so not primarily to convince them, especially when you recognize the pattern of intractable defense, but to honor your own commitment to reason and honesty. State your position, provide your evidence if appropriate, and then, crucially, move on. Let go of the need for their validation or admission. Release yourself from the responsibility of dismantling their ego's defenses. That is their internal battle to fight or not fight as they choose. Your responsibility ends with a clear and honest articulation of your perspective. This requires cultivating an understanding that truth possesses inherent value, independent of its reception. A fact remains a fact whether it is acknowledged or denied. A sound argument retains its validity even if the listener refuses to accept it. Your goal shifts from seeking external validation, I need them to admit I'm right, to maintaining internal integrity, I need to speak and recognize the truth as best I can. This detachment saves enormous amounts of energy and prevents the immense frustration that comes from repeatedly banging your head against the wall of someone else's pride. Focus on your own learning and growth. Be open to admitting when you are wrong. A true Stoic virtue, reflecting humility and commitment to truth, and invest your conversational energy where it has a chance of yielding productive results, either in mutual learning or in constructive disagreement with those open to reason. Truth doesn't require applause or admission from the unwilling. It simply requires clarity and your own commitment to it. You are not the custodian of another person's ego. You are the steward of your own reason and peace. 5. They move the goalposts. Consider the scenario. You engage someone in a discussion or debate, perhaps about a specific issue or proposed solution. You carefully address their initial concern, providing a well-reasoned response or evidence that directly counters their point. You feel a sense of minor accomplishment, having met their challenge. But then, instead of acknowledging your response or engaging with it, they abruptly shift the ground beneath your feet. Okay, maybe, they concede vaguely, but what about this completely different issue? Or, That's fine, but you haven't considered this new criterion I just invented. Suddenly, the target you were aiming for has vanished, replaced by another, then perhaps another. This frustrating tactic, known colloquially as moving the goalposts, transforms what should be a focused conversation into a bewildering and unwinnable game. You are constantly chasing a receding target, addressing points only to have them dismissed and replaced with new, often unrelated, challenges. This isn't merely a sign of a disorganized thinker. It's often a deliberate, if sometimes subconscious, strategy employed by those who are not interested in reaching a resolution, understanding a different perspective, or genuinely testing the validity of an idea. Instead, the shifting goalposts serve other purposes. It can be a defensive mechanism used by someone who senses their original argument is weak or has been effectively countered. By introducing new complexities or changing the subject, they avoid conceding defeat on the initial point. It can also be a tactic for maintaining control over the conversation, keeping the other person constantly on the defensive, scrambling to address an ever-expanding list of demands or objections. Sometimes, it stems from a desire to simply prolong the argument indefinitely, perhaps because they enjoy the conflict or want to exhaust their interlocutor into submission or silence. The underlying theme is a lack of commitment to a stable framework for discussion. The rules of engagement are fluid, changing whenever convenient for the goalpost mover. Engaging with someone who persistently moves the goalposts is like trying to navigate a maze whose walls constantly shift. It's disorienting, exhausting, and ultimately fruitless. You might spend considerable effort addressing the second point, only to have a third, fourth, and fifth suddenly materialize. You find yourself drawn deeper into tangential issues, straying far from the original topic, without ever achieving closure on any single point. The conversation devolves into an exercise in intellectual endurance rather than a pursuit of clarity or agreement. Each time you meet their challenge, instead of progressing the dialogue, you merely reset the game board according to their new, arbitrary rules. The energy expenditure is immense, and the returns, in terms of understanding or resolution, are negligible. Continuing to play this game implicitly validates their evasive tactics and allows them to dictate the terms of the interaction indefinitely. Stoicism, with its emphasis on rationality, purposefulness, and the conservation of vital resources like time and mental energy, provides a clear lens through which to view and respond to this behavior. The Stoics value clarity of thought and purposeful action. Engaging in a conversation that lacks a stable focus and seems designed to avoid resolution rather than achieve it runs counter to these principles. Seneca, in particular, wrote extensively on the shortness of life and the importance of using our limited time wisely, avoiding pointless distractions and unproductive entanglements. A conversation where the goalposts are constantly moving is a prime example of such an entanglement. It consumes time and energy without leading towards any meaningful destination. The Stoic approach begins with pattern recognition. Notice when a discussion partner consistently deflects, introduces new, unrelated criteria, or dismisses valid responses by simply changing the subject. See this not as a challenge to redouble your efforts, but as a signal that the conversation has lost its structural integrity and purpose. Recognize that this shifting is likely not about genuine inquiry, but about control, evasion, or prolonging conflict. Once the pattern is identified, the wise response is to refuse to chase the moving targets. You are not obligated to follow them down every rabbit hole they dig. You have several options, grounded in maintaining your own rational control and respecting your time. You could gently but firmly bring the conversation back to the original point. Before we move on to that, I'd like to resolve the initial point we were discussing. Or, I notice we've shifted from the original topic. Can we return to X? This attempts to re-establish the conversational frame. However, if the pattern persists, a more decisive disengagement may be necessary. You might explicitly name the pattern. It seems every time I address a point, the focus shifts. I'm finding it difficult to have a productive conversation this way. This can sometimes prompt self-awareness, but often it doesn't. In that case, the most Stoic response is often to simply exit the game. State clearly that you don't see the conversation progressing productively and choose to disengage. I don't think we're making progress here, as the core issue keeps changing. Perhaps we can revisit this another time. Or even a simple, I need to focus my energy elsewhere now. The key insight is that you do not owe someone your continued engagement simply because they demand it, especially when they refuse to engage in good faith within a stable framework. Your time and mental energy are valuable resources. A Stoic conserves these resources for purposeful action and meaningful interaction. By recognizing the moving goalpost tactic and choosing to disengage, you reclaim control over your own focus, preserve your peace of mind, and refuse to participate in a futile and frustrating game. You owe yourself your peace far more than you owe them an endless chase. 6. They make it personal. There often comes a point in a deteriorating argument when the focus takes a sharp, unpleasant turn. Logic falters, evidence is ignored, and suddenly the discussion of the issue morphs into an attack on the person. Instead of addressing the substance of your points, your interlocutor begins to direct insults, criticisms, or accusations at your character, intelligence, appearance, motives, or background. Only an idiot would believe that. You're just saying that because you're insert label. What would you know about it? With your irrelevant personal detail. This shift to ad hominem attacks is a significant red flag, a clear indicator that reasoned discourse has collapsed and the other party has resorted to aggression and personal derogation, often out of desperation or malice. It's a tactic designed not to win the argument on merit, but to wound, provoke, and silence the opponent through personal injury. Personal attacks are a weaponization of insecurity and hostility. When someone feels intellectually cornered, unable to refute your argument logically, or simply desires to inflict emotional pain, they may lash out personally. These attacks serve several functions for the attacker. They derail the conversation, shifting the focus away from their weak position onto your alleged flaws. They aim to undermine your credibility, suggesting that because you possess some supposed negative trait, your arguments are automatically invalid. Most significantly, personal attacks are designed to trigger an emotional reaction. They are bait, dangled temptingly, intended to provoke anger, defensiveness, or hurt feelings. If you take the bait and respond emotionally, defending yourself against the insult, launching a counterattack, they have succeeded in shifting the ground from rational debate to personal conflict, a domain where they may feel more comfortable or believe they can win by sheer aggression. Reacting defensively or angrily to personal attacks, while a natural human response, is precisely the reaction the attacker often seeks. It validates their tactic by showing as landed. It escalates the negativity, and it completely abandons any hope of returning to a productive discussion of the original topic. Engaging with the insult, even to refute it, "I am not an idiot," legitimizes it as a point worthy of discussion within the context of the argument. Launching a counterattack, "Well, you're the real idiot," lowers you to their level, sacrificing your own composure and dignity. Either way, you have fallen into the trap they set. You allowed them to dictate the terms of engagement, shifting from a battle of ideas to a brawl of insults. Stoicism offers a powerful shield against the sting of personal attacks and a clear guide for response. Central to Stoic resilience is the understanding, again rooted in the dichotomy of control and the nature of judgment, that insults and external opinions are just that, external. They derive their power to harm not from the words themselves, but from our assent to them, our judgment that they are indeed harmful or true. Epictetus was particularly clear on this. If someone succeeds in provoking you, realize that your mind is complicit in the provocation. And remember, it is not enough to be hit or insulted to be harmed. You must believe that you are being harmed. If someone succeeds when in angering you, realize that your own opinion has angered you. Therefore, the first Stoic defense against personal attacks is internal. Recognize the insult for what it is, likely a sign of the attacker's weakness, frustration, or poor character, rather than an accurate reflection of your own worth. Refuse to internalize it. See it as noise, not signal. Remind yourself that your value is determined by your character and actions virtue, which are within your control, not by the hostile words of another, which are outside your control. Cultivate apatheia, that inner calm state unperturbed by external provocations. The practical Stoic response flows from this internal state. When the insults begin, recognize them as a definitive sign that the conversation has ceased to be productive. This is the clearest signal to disengage. Do not take the bait. Do not defend yourself against a personal slight within the context of the argument. It's irrelevant to the topic at hand. Responding with silence is often the most powerful and dignified response. It communicates that the attack is beneath acknowledgement, that it has failed to provoke you, and that you refuse to descend to that level. Your refusal to engage robs the attack of its intended power. If silence feels inappropriate or unsafe, a calm, brief statement indicating the irrelevance of the attack can suffice. Personal comments aren't helpful to this discussion, or, I'm not going to respond to insults. If you'd like to return to the topic, I'm willing to continue. Then, if they persist, disengage decisively. Marcus Aurelius advised, the best revenge is to be unlike him who performed the injury. By refusing to be provoked, by maintaining your composure and dignity when faced with personal attacks, you demonstrate superior strength of character. You protect your inner peace and refuse to grant the attacker the satisfaction of having wounded or controlled you. Remember, your dignity speaks loudest when it refuses to engage with indignity. Silence in the face of personal attack is not weakness. It is a profound statement of self-control and self-respect. 7. They just want to waste time. Not all arguments stem from deeply held convictions or a genuine clash of perspectives. Sometimes, you find yourself ensnared in a conversation with someone whose primary motivation appears to be not reaching understanding, solving a problem, or even winning in the conventional sense, but simply passing the time. These individuals argue not because they care passionately about the topic, nor because they seek intellectual stimulation through rigorous debate, but often because they are bored, crave drama, or enjoy the friction of pointless conflict. They are conversational time wasters, energy vampires who feed on engagement itself, regardless of its substance or direction. You can often sense this dynamic. The argument seems circular, never progressing. Points are made and remade without resolution. They seem to relish provoking reactions rather than exchanging ideas, and there's a distinct lack of any discernible purpose or desired outcome beyond the continuation of the debate itself. These time-wasting arguments can be subtly corrosive. They might drag you into endless debates over trivial matters, nitpicking details that have no real bearing on a larger issue. They might play devil's advocate relentlessly, not to explore facets of an issue, but simply to keep the conversational ball in the air, regardless of how nonsensical their counterpositions become. They might repeatedly bring up settled points or demand explanations for things already clarified, feigning confusion or dissatisfaction to prolong the interaction. The feeling is one of spinning your wheels, expending significant mental and emotional energy without moving an inch. They might seem to enjoy the back and forth for its own sake, finding entertainment in the friction or the attention it brings them. They aren't seeking resolution. They are seeking engagement, often at your expense. This isn't dialogue. It's a form of procedural consumption, where the procedure is argument and the thing being consumed is your time and attention. Engaging extensively with someone whose primary goal is to waste time is akin to willingly pouring your most valuable, non-renewable resource down the drain. You have goals to pursue, projects to complete, meaningful relationships to nurture, a life to build and experience. Every minute spent locked in a pointless, circular argument with someone who is essentially treating the conversation as a form of entertainment or distraction is a minute irrevocably lost to those more important endeavors. Furthermore, these interactions can be incredibly draining, leaving you feeling frustrated, depleted, and perhaps even questioning your own judgment for having gotten sucked in. Continuing to engage signals that your time and energy are readily available for such unproductive consumption, potentially inviting more of the same in the future. Stoicism places an exceptionally high value on time. Seneca's essay on the shortness of life is a powerful meditation on how much of our precious time we squander on trivialities, pointless pursuits, and the demands of others who do not respect its value. He urges us to be fierce guardians of our time, recognizing it as our most finite and valuable possession, to be allocated intentionally towards what truly matters: virtue, wisdom, meaningful work, and genuine connection. Engaging in arguments purely for the sake of argument, with individuals who demonstrate no respect for resolution or purpose, is a cardinal violation of the Stoic principle. It is allowing your most valuable asset to be frittered away by another's boredom or need for drama. The Stoic approach, therefore, is rooted in the conscious and deliberate protection of your time and energy. First, develop the ability to recognize the signs of a time-wasting argument. Is the conversation going in circles? Is the other person genuinely engaging with points, or just generating friction? Does the interaction feel purposeful, or like an end in itself? Is this person known for seeking drama or arguing endlessly without resolution? Trust your intuition when an interaction feels draining and pointless. Once you recognize that you are likely dealing with a conversational time waster, the response should be polite but firm disengagement. You are under no obligation to serve as someone else's entertainment or to fill their empty hours with pointless debate. You do not owe anyone your presence or attention simply because they demand it through argumentative provocation. Value your own time and purpose more highly. Set clear boundaries. This might involve statements like, "I've shared my perspective on this, and I don't have anything further to add right now," or "I need to focus on other tasks, so I can't continue this discussion," or even a simple, "I'm going to have to leave this conversation here." The key is clarity, firmness, and a lack of apology for prioritizing your own time and energy. This isn't about being rude or dismissive of people generally, but about recognizing specific interaction dynamics that are fundamentally unproductive and disrespectful of your time. The Stoics were not hermits, but they were highly intentional about how they spent their time and who they spent it with, prioritizing interactions that fostered wisdom, virtue, and genuine connection. Protect your focus. Guard your energy. Remember that your life is composed of finite moments, and choosing how to spend those moments is one of the most critical exercises of your freedom and wisdom. Don't let your valuable time become the casualty of someone else's boredom. You owe yourself the focused pursuit of a meaningful life far more than you owe a time waster an endless, pointless argument. At its core, Stoic philosophy teaches us that the real battle is not out there. It's within. You don't have to attend every argument you're invited to. Some victories are silent. Some power is shown by turning away, not by pushing forward. So the next time you find yourself being pulled into chaos, ask yourself, is this worth my peace? And if the answer is no, walk away with grace, with strength, and with the unshakable peace of someone who knows their worth. If you found value in this video, like, share, and subscribe for more Stoic insights that help you rise above the noise. Until next time, stay calm, stay grounded, and protect your peace.